Mom. Wake up, Mom. How long had I been asleep? Suddenly jolted awake by the shaking, I sprung up in bed. Forcing my heavy eyelids open, I found Emily on her knees by the bed, shaking me. Emily. What's wrong? It's still the middle of the night, right? The clock is pointing to 2 a.m. It was still far from morning. Unperturbed by my reluctance, Emily dragged me out of bed. Hurry. Just come with me. Emily pulled me by the hand and dragged me into the closet. After closing the door forcefully, she cautiously peeked through the gap into the room. I was frightened by Emily's unusual behavior, but fearfully peeked into the room through the gap. Emily stopped me just as I was about to scream. My body started shaking, and I was transfixed by the scene unfolding in the room. My name is Julie. I am a 48-year-old homemaker. I married my current husband, Mark, 5 years ago and became a homemaker. Before getting married, I worked with computers, which left little room for social interactions. I dedicated my 20s and 30s to my career. Working together with Mark, who was in sales at another company, was what sparked our relationship. Mark, who knew much that I did not about life beyond work, taught me various things. As our relationship deepened, I learned that he had a daughter from his late wife. Having had almost no romantic experiences, I was initially staggered by this fact. You don't have to force yourself to accept it. He took my various thoughts and feelings into consideration and continued our relationship as if I had the right to make the decision. No matter how considerate Mark was, the fact remained unchanged. As I continued to struggle with whether to keep dating Mark, I eventually met his daughter, Emily. When I first met Mark's daughter, Emily, she was 12 years old. It was a sensitive time for her, being in middle school. When Emily first saw me, she neither showed hostility nor seemed particularly fond of me. She just seemed utterly indifferent. Rather, it seemed like she didn't care about me at all. Perhaps it had something to do with the fact that not much time had passed since her own mother died, but anyway. Emily did not try to become attached to me. Moreover, she didn't appear to be opening up to her own father, Mark, as well. At that time, I optimistically thought that she must have had her reasons. Meeting Emily somehow resolved my determination. The hurdle of marrying a man with a daughter seemed to disappear. I even had the sweet resolve that I have to make her happy. Hearing of my resolve, Mark was delighted, and I soon received a marriage proposal from him. Of course I accepted it, and happily became Mark's wife and Emily's stepmother. Soon after, I moved into the house where Mark and Emily had been living. I had visited there many times before, but now it was to be my home. Mark bought this house soon after Emily was born with his previous wife. It's a typical 2-story house, but it's more than spacious enough for 3 people to live in. Once I started living there, various things I hadn't noticed during my visits began to bother me. It was the traces of the former wife left behind in the house. Even though I knew she was deceased, these traces tormented me. In the vanity inside the bathroom, various lotions were left as they were. In the master bedroom's built-in closet, numerous makeup items were still there. Although I'm not given to occult thinking, every time I found these traces of the former wife, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow still present in the house. Mark was insensitive to such points and seemed completely unaware of my confusion. When I casually mentioned the items, he simply said, "If they're in the way, you can throw them out." Even with Mark's permission, I couldn't possibly do it. Erasing the traces of his previous wife throughout the house would be unfair to Emily. I felt creeped out inside but decided to keep her belongings as much as I could. There was another concern that began to bother me since starting our new life together. It was Mark's attitude towards Emily and me. Until we got married, I was too caught up in the excitement to notice, but it seemed like Mark resented Emily. I couldn't understand why. However, it was clear that his feelings were evident in his actions. Moreover, despite being so kind before we got married, his attitude towards me had also changed. He didn't overtly criticize or insult me, but it was obvious that his affection for me had cooled. Mark used his busy work schedule as an excuse, coming home late almost every weekday. Sometimes, he even stayed overnight at the office. Before we got married, we would have weekday dates and spend time at home with Emily, but all that changed abruptly after our marriage. I didn't want to think it, but it became clear that Mark was pushing Emily onto me. I don't know the details, but it seems he didn't think too highly of his previous wife. Because of that, it seems his hostility is now directed towards Emily. Am I just a convenient housekeeper that takes care of Emily? Does Mark not love me? Even though we spend more time together, Emily has not opened up to me much. She isn't defiant or disobedient, but she still treats me like a stranger. Certainly, it's not easy to simply accept a new mother with a simple okay. But I understand that this situation isn't good for either Emily or me. I'm also worried about Mark's attitude. My mind was soon filled with these anxieties, with no room to enjoy our newlywed life. Despite carrying all these thoughts, I was doing my best to get through the days. Every morning I woke up at 5 a.m. to make Emily's lunch. After preparing breakfast for Emily and Mark and sending them off, I would do laundry and cleaning. For my own lunch, I would quickly eat leftovers from the previous night, then do the shopping and prepare dinner. In such a hectic daily life, there was no time to calmly face my anxieties. Whether this was good or bad, I didn't know, but before I realized it, 5 years had passed. Emily was now an 18-year-old high school senior, with college entrance exams looming. Even in such circumstances, Mark didn't seem to care about Emily, leaving things like parent-teacher conferences entirely up to me. Although Emily still hadn't opened up to me, I felt that our communication had increased. If I made lunch, she would say thank you, and sometimes she would even help with the housework. Although few words were exchanged between us, I was content with that. Perhaps this was the comfortable distance for both of us. One day, Emily suddenly said something unexpected. I threw away my previous mom's lotion that was in the bathroom. I will also throw away the stuff in the closet. Can I go into the room? The way she referred to her as the previous mom showed how considerate Emily was being towards me. How did Emily know about the many keepsakes of the previous wife in the closet? Although it raised a slight question in my mind, I took it as a good opportunity to ask Emily to handle the disposal of the keepsakes. I'm sorry for making you feel obligated. You don't have to throw away your mom's things if it's too hard. I said this, trying to be as considerate as possible, but Emily quickly dismissed it. It's okay. These things should have been disposed of much earlier. Saying that, Emily gathered all the items in the closet and packed them into garbage bags. I was left with indescribable feelings, but it must have been an important act for Emily to put her feelings to rest. Accepting this, I sincerely thanked her. Soon after, I faced a new challenge. I learned that Mark was apparently having an affair. The realization of the affair came from a typical scenario. When I noticed that we were out of the seasoning needed to make Emily's lunch, I rushed to the supermarket just before it closed. After purchasing the needed seasoning and hurrying home, I spotted Mark walking ahead of me. He was with a young woman. At first, I thought she might be a colleague from his office, but the closeness between them was not that of a subordinate and superior. Clearly, they were romantically involved. My intuition screamed this truth. I followed them discreetly. Sure enough, they headed into a hotel. Of course, I was furious and deeply shocked. However, part of me had almost resigned to such a possibility. Indeed, this was what I truly felt, I knew it. Always pushing Emily onto me while he carried on a relationship with another woman. He probably doesn't divorce me because I take care of Emily. To Mark, I am nothing more than a housekeeper. Heartbroken, I returned home and contemplated the future. What future awaits Emily and me? Should I honestly tell Emily about what I just saw? But even if I told her, as a minor, there's nothing Emily could do about it. She would only be hurt. Considering this, I decided to overlook Mark's actions. This is best for both Emily and me. I had thought, Mark is dumping Emily on me, but I realized I actually love her. Now, I'm embarrassed by even having thought that way. Once I calmed down at home, I was tormented by feelings of guilt. Eventually, dawn broke, and I hadn't slept at all. As usual, I began preparing the lunchbox for Emily to take with her. It seems Mark hasn't come home tonight. His staying overnight at the office was likely a lie, he was probably at the hotel with that woman from yesterday. With this depressing thought, I efficiently prepared the side dishes. Then, an hour earlier than usual, Emily came down the stairs. Good morning. In a hurry, I served the remainings of the lunch I was preparing on a plate at Emily's spot. Sorry, were you supposed to leave early today? Emily shook her head. No, sorry to rush you. I just have a place to go to. And, I think Dad will be home tonight. While saying this, Emily quickly ate the breakfast I had prepared. Thanks for the meal. Emily quickly headed toward the entrance. Here's your lunch. I handed the lunchbox to Emily as she put on her shoes. Thank you, she said, looking me in the eyes. I know everything, so it's okay. With those words, Emily rushed out the door. What does she mean by, knows everything? Given the timing, she must be referring to Mark's affair. But how did she come to know about it? Had she been aware of it for some time and kept silent for my sake? Just as I had tried to protect her by hiding the truth, Emily had been doing the same for me. Emily didn't say everything, but I was sure that's what she meant. Truly, she had grown into a wonderful daughter. Despite everything, I felt strangely fulfilled. However, I wondered where Emily could be going so early in the morning. I hope she's not planning to face Mark. Being the smart girl that she is, she probably wouldn't do anything reckless, but I was still worried. I spent the whole day fretting, waiting for Emily to come home. In the evening, as if she had forgotten about the morning's events, Emily returned home acting as usual. I decided not to bring up the morning's incident and behaved as normal. Then, after we finished dinner, something unexpected happened. I'm home. Just as Emily had mentioned in the morning, Mark came home. And unusually early at that. I had dinner out. Mark said, glancing sideways at Emily and me before quickly heading to the bathroom. As I looked at Emily bewildered, she nodded meaningfully. I'm tired, so I'm going to bed now. After coming out of the bathroom, Mark went straight to the bedroom. I softly said goodnight and saw him off. It was unusual for him to come home this early. I wondered what had happened. I had many questions, but Emily's eyes said, don't ask anything. Emily and I finished cleaning up after dinner as usual and took turns heading to the bathroom. I knew something was going to happen, but I didn't know what. Controlled by a sinister premonition, I entered the bedroom where Mark was sleeping. What is this? As soon as I opened the bedroom door, an unpleasant flow of air came out. It's hard to describe, but the room was enveloped in a slightly putrid air. Moreover, despite it being spring, the temperature inside the bedroom was abnormally low and cold. This chill wasn't just my imagination, I felt my body starting to shake. Looking at Mark on the bed, he seemed completely unaware of these abnormalities, snoring away in his sleep. I wonder if I didn't notice any change in Mark's body odor because we hadn't slept together for a while. Despite feeling resist to sleeping in the same bed, I couldn't stand the cold and crawled under the blanket. The eerie atmosphere seemed to persist, but strangely, as soon as I got under the blanket, I was overwhelmed by a sudden wave of sleepiness. What's going on? Usually, I don't fall asleep easily, and it's earlier than my normal bedtime. Despite this, I was assaulted by such intense drowsiness that it was hard to keep conscious. Unable to resist my heavy eyelids, I eventually fell asleep. Mom. Wake up, Mom. How long had I been asleep? Suddenly jolted awake by the shaking, I sprang up in bed. Forcing my heavy eyelids open, I found Emily on her knees by the bed, shaking me. Emily. What's going on? It's still the middle of the night, right? Confused and still groggy, I glanced at the clock beside the bed. The clock read 2 a.m. It was still far from morning. Unperturbed by my reluctance, Emily dragged me out of bed. Hurry. Just come with me. Emily pulled me by the hand and dragged me into the closet. Before I knew what was happening, Emily and I were locked together in the closet. At this hour. As I was about to speak, Emily covered my mouth. About 5 minutes after we entered the closet, we suddenly began to hear noises from the room. Checking cautiously, Emily slightly opened the closet door to peek outside. The faint light in the room illuminated Emily's face, and I could finally see her expression. She looked terrified. Her eyes were wide open, and her face was etched with fear. As my mind cleared, I gently placed my hand on Emily's shoulder from behind. Startled as if snapping back to reality, Emily quickly turned to look at me. She then slowly pointed towards the gap in the door. It seemed she was indicating that I should check outside. Despite my fear from Emily's intense state, I cautiously peeked through the gap into the room. I almost screamed, but Emily stopped me again. My body began to tremble as I was fixated on the scene in the room. From the gap, I could see our bed. Mark was lying there as usual, but there was a woman standing next to him. Normally, you would think she was his affair partner, but I knew immediately. This woman was not alive. Something inside me was screaming this warning at full speed. The woman, with her long black hair hanging down, was looking down at the sleeping Mark. Emily didn't say anything, but I knew this woman was Mark's former wife. Listening closely, I could hear the former wife whispering something into Mark's ear. Although I couldn't make out the words, each time she spoke, Mark's body twitched violently. This scene repeated several times right before our eyes, but neither Emily nor I could move from our spot. Before we knew it, light began to filter into the room. Dawn was breaking. As it did, the apparition of the former wife gradually faded, becoming harder to discern. Once she completely vanished, I finally felt able to move. Emily and I hurried out of the closet and left the room. Descending to the living room, we collapsed onto the sofa, and I noticed that my pajamas were soaked with sweat. Emily's thin t-shirt had changed color from the amount of sweat it absorbed. After sitting in silence for a while, Emily finally spoke up. "You saw it, right?" She was angry. Struggling to find her words, she continued. "Did she save me?" When I asked, Emily slowly nodded. My previous mom, she hated Dad. Because he neglected her when she was sick and cheated on her. According to what Emily slowly explained next, it seems the former wife also resents me. That makes sense. After all, I was the one he was having an affair with. Mark had indeed told me he was married and that his wife had passed away, but he hadn't said she was still alive at that time. I had been deceived from the start. Perhaps he only intended me as a fling at that time. A convenient woman to play with and to look after his daughter, probably that's what he was thinking. Even though I didn't know anything, it's natural to be resented. I must have been the woman who took her husband away while she was suffering from her illness. But, I went to Mom's grave this morning and asked for her help. Emily said this, seeing my face turn pale with despair. There was a reason why the former wife had appeared today like this. Today was, in fact, the anniversary of her death. Emily had gone to visit her mother's grave, and while there, she had spoken to her about me. Emily seems to have been born with a mysterious ability, which appears to have been inherited from the previous wife. The previous wife also possessed such abilities during her lifetime and often saw ghosts. The reason Emily suddenly disposed of her mother's belongings recently was to prevent any harm from coming to me. As the anniversary of her death approached, the presence of my previous mom became stronger. I hate Dad too, but I don't hate you, Mom. Because you were a victim of Dad's deceit. Mark's return home yesterday was also influenced by the former wife's presence. A mysterious force I couldn't understand compelled Mark to come back to this house. Emily asserted that Mark wouldn't be able to get away with it, though he hadn't woken up yet. Dad will surely be taken away too. I was chilled by her words, but Emily immediately clarified. Taken away, but only in spirit. At the time, I didn't fully understand what Emily meant, but from her composed demeanor, it seemed that the worst wouldn't happen. We talked for so long that Emily completely forgot about going to school. In such a situation, it was impossible to focus on normal studies. When I checked the time, it was 8:30 a.m. It was about time for Mark to go to work. As I hesitated whether to wake him, Mark thundered down the stairs, making a loud noise. It's unclear whether he's groggy from sleep or affected by last night's events. However, he is definitely not in a normal state. Mark sat down in his usual spot in the kitchen with vacant eyes. Dad, isn't there something you want to say? Mom came last night, didn't she? As she rose from the sofa, Emily approached Mark and spoke. Upon hearing her words, a flicker of sanity returned to Mark's eyes for a moment. However, it quickly turned to a look of madness, and he stood up, knocking his chair over dramatically. What are you talking about? He was clearly agitated by the words, Mom came. The words electrified him, briefly bringing him back to his senses, but then fear took over. I thought about helping Dad at first. But you have cheated again and haven't learned anything. You don't care about Mom, and you don't feel bad about my previous mom. Accused by his own daughter, Mark grew even more furious. Everything Emily said hit the mark. Are you disrespecting your parent? Mark lunged to strike Emily, but I quickly intervened. The next moment, my hand had slapped Mark's cheek. Stop it. Don't show us any more of your miserable self. As I slapped Mark's cheek, I shouted those words. A flame of anger flashed in his eyes as he glared at me, but it quickly subsided. He couldn't believe he was being scolded by me. Moreover, my words wounded him more deeply than I had imagined. Your daughter saw through all your plans. You might have thought you were deceiving her well, but she knew everything. She knew you were neglecting your sick wife and having an affair. I unleashed everything I had heard from Emily onto Mark. Emily's pain, listening to her real mother's resentful words as she struggled with illness and witnessing her final moments. The suffering of continuing to live with Mark, who had abandoned them. And the confusion of being raised by me, the woman who took away her real mother. All these feelings Emily had borne alone as she grew up. Shame on you. I can't believe a small man like you could have such a daughter. Knowing everything, I can't stay the same. Thinking about how Emily has been fighting alone, tears overflowed from my eyes. Don't talk nonsense. I didn't abandon her, it's not my fault. Mark, pale-faced, still refused to reflect on his actions. But it's clear he's so disturbed because he feels guilty. Who is talking nonsense here? You cheat on me with another woman while we're married, and you have the nerve to say that? What's so good about such a pathetic man? Watching Mark panic, I felt sick. Mom was always angry. Every day, she resented you on the bed. I don't think of you as my father anymore, so I asked Mom to take you with her. Emily whispered quietly, and Mark's face grew even paler. The events of earlier flashed through his mind, no doubt sending shivers of fear through him again. It's too late to apologize now. I'll make sure to explain everything to your mistress and your colleagues, so go in peace. It's over now. Suddenly, those words slipped from my mouth. Despite the sunrise, the room darkened. Without notice, the lights went out and a lukewarm breeze started blowing. A foul smell like the night before began to permeate the air again. She's here. Mom has come. Despite Emily's words, I couldn't see the former wife's figure as I did last night. It seems Emily couldn't see her either. Only Mark was staring intently at one spot, his eyes wide open. Indeed, the former wife was standing there. No, it's not true. I didn't abandon you. Yes, it was her, she deceived me. Mark collapsed to the ground but pointed at me and yelled. He seemed to be accusing me of having an affair with him while knowing about his former wife. This is completely false. So, forgive me. If you must resent someone, take her. Take her with you. Mark cried out, desperately appealing to the invisible former wife. Looking at him, I saw that Mark had wet himself. Julie. Please, I love you. Mark called out pathetically, clinging to me. I reflexively brushed away the hand he stretched towards me. Don't touch me. I don't love you at all. Mark's anguished cries continued, but his gaze shifted dramatically. The distance between him and the former wife was closing rapidly. Dad, goodbye. As Emily spoke, a foul-smelling gust swept through the room. I closed my eyes for a moment, but when I opened them again, everything had returned to normal. Except for Mark. The room regained its brightness, but Mark remained slumped on the floor, staring blankly with unfocused eyes. Ugh. His mouth hung open slackly, drool dripping from it. Mark continued to mutter meaningless words, seemingly unable to see us. Mom took Dad's feelings with her. While intently watching her father, now reduced to a shell of his former self, Emily quietly said. It's over now. This means the previous wife will no longer appear in this house. I didn't understand everything, but I could clearly say just that. The gloomy atmosphere that had dominated the house was gone, and a somewhat refreshing air began to drift through. Emily, thank you. Despite it being my fault that your mom met such an end. I said this and embraced Emily. It's all Dad's fault. You did nothing wrong. And my previous mom understands now. Emily murmured this while in my arms, gently patting my back. Leaving the lost Mark as he was, we held each other for a long time. Later, I called an ambulance to take Mark to the hospital. Dr. Parker was quite shocked to see Mark's unresponsive state. According to Dr. Parker, there is no hope for recovery. Was there any sudden shock? He asked. This is not normal. Although asked by Dr. Parker, I couldn't tell him the truth and continued to evade his questions. Perhaps sensing my demeanor, Dr. Parker did not probe further. One encounters mysterious things when having been a doctor for so long. There must be some supernatural factor that we don't understand, he added. We discussed Mark's future and decided to admit him to a nearby psychiatric hospital as I had no intention of caring for him. Mark would likely never leave the hospital. After completing all the procedures, I returned home and reported the hospital visit to Emily. Emily did not object to my decision. That's fine. I don't want to see his face or take care of him either. I want you to live your own life from now on. Emily, looking a bit sad at the end, said so. She probably thinks her presence would keep me tied to this house. I will always be with you. Even with what happened to your dad, our relationship won't change. I had come to love Emily from the bottom of my heart, and that feeling would not change. Being a minor, Emily was just putting on a strong front. She didn't really want to be alone. As she cried, thanking me repeatedly, I reassured her, "Thank you." We began a new life with Emily. At her request, we moved away from the house that held memories of the previous wife and Mark. Staying there would have made Emily involuntarily recall various memories. We rented a small apartment, not spacious, but it was a fresh start for us. Emily successfully passed the university entrance exam she had long hoped for and started college this spring. I began working again to support Emily's life. Since my job involves using computers, I often work from home, allowing me more time with Emily. Though I started working again, we could have lived off the money Mark had saved and his insurance. Mark had planned to build another house with his mistress and had saved a substantial amount. Since I kept the legal ties with Mark for Emily's sake, this money naturally came to me. Of course, I planned to use this money for Emily, so I decided to earn my own money as much as possible. I've returned to working in society, but I don't feel that life has become more difficult. In fact, starting work has increased my sense of fulfillment. Our relationship deepened further, and Emily's past indifference seems like a lie now. Mom. Remember, we're going to the movies tomorrow. You haven't forgotten, have you? Now we often go out together, and Emily's personality has become brighter. Though I was unaware at the time, I ended up taking away the life that Emily and her biological mother had. However, both of them have forgiven me, and now they grant me these happy days. Grateful for this miraculous life, I will continue to protect Emily. Even if challenges await us on our path, I am confident that together we can overcome them. Every time I see Emily's smile, I feel this conviction even more strongly.